Okay, this is a Bruni Colt 1911 blank firer. Many of you will know these if you're into reenactment and so on. They fire 8mm blanks. Unlike the real Colt, the magazine release is just dummy here on the side. This is the older model of the Bruni. The new models, which is the Mark IV or the Mark V, have actually gone back to using a mag release there instead of having this this catch, which is a little unrealistic down on the bottom of the magazine. So as you can see, the mag is for taking 8mm blanks. It doesn't fill the full magazine width like a proper 9mm or 45 would probably do. Yeah, so basically this one here is one that I've been asked to do some repairs on. Basically I've done some repair on this already, but the cocking spring, the hammer spring I should say, is not up to full strength. You can hear there. If you compare that to a correct one, far crisper and a louder report when you pull the trigger. Right, so to strip these things down is fairly easy. To take the trigger mechanism out, you basically take the screws out of the grip on both sides. This one being a slightly older model, it's got nice standard slot screws. Once you get that far, you're then presented with two pins which have got to be removed. This one has been in and out the gun a number of times and is quite loose. So there's the large one, which is up at the rear of the hammer. And then you've got another one which is just here. One way it comes out quite easily. Okay, might need to give it a little tap. There we go. There's the spring, there's the pin out. Right, then this comes out complete of the rear. So that is the trigger mechanism, trigger mechanism housing. That composes of three main parts inside. Well, actually, yeah, three main parts inside here, and that's inclusive of the hammer. Now the hammer had actually, yeah, the hammer had started to deform from use. Basically, it had been struck on the firing pin a number of times and deformed. It started to have a pit in it. So what I've done is I've used Tech Weld to build it back up again. You've got to be careful though if you do that sort of thing, because once you're heating this up with, say, a propane torch, it's very easy to completely deform and melt the whole hammer. Now, to get at this spring is then very easy. We've taken the main two pins out. Now we just lift the side off, and when you lift the side off, quite often the little springs and components on the SAE mechanism tend to jump out on you. I'm just pushing that back into position, and basically you have the mechanism there. This is the magazine spring, and there we go, there's lost another spring there now, but I will find that in a little while. Yeah, so obviously if you start moving these things around when you've got no side on, it's easy for them to jump out. Now that's the offending component there. That's the hammer spring. If I hold my finger over the top of that there and cock that back, you will see how it all operates. Yeah, so basically that's latched back by this little SAE here, which holds it. and to when the trigger gets fired, when the trigger gets pulled, it pushes on that component there. But I'm not going to do it at the moment because it might stress the pins due to only having one side of the mechanism on. So I'm going to release this gently by hand. Okay, so I'm going to take out the offending component, as I mentioned, which is the hammer spring just there. So that's what it looks like. Now I'm going to be making and supplying some replacements for these. So I'm basically doing a little instructional video on how to replace them, which is of course exactly the opposite of taking it apart. Okay, so here's the spring I've made. It works fairly well. Basically, I've taken off the little serre component and so on, so the hammer comes away from it like so, and the spring should sit in there, and then that bends round, as you can see there. So to fit this, it's best leaving the hammer on the pin like so. I'm trying not to get my hands too much in the way of the camera here, but it's fairly easy to fit it. You can do it with your fingers and then press it down. You might need a pair of pliers to hold it in position just before you assemble it. The back end of the spring here should sit in a small notch on that post. Doesn't have to. I'm sure it'll find its own way in there when you start using it. So that fits back there. You've then got the serre here and this small spring which fits over. Trying to do this and still show it on the camera. Fits over the spring, over the little pin like that. I think I'm going to have to zoom out. Fits over the pin like so. Then that goes on to the mechanism, and you slide the pin down into the we could call it lock plate, I suppose, if you want to use old-fashioned terms. I don't know whether it's visible. I'm trying to make it visible. There we go. Push that down with your fingers so it all sits in like so. Yeah. Okay, so that's essentially the components back together. I think that spring there wants to sit a little bit lower. Yeah, that's near enough it. Okay, then the other side plate then has to be slid back on. A little pin in there quite often needs teasing into position like so. So we've got an assembled trigger mechanism, and you can feel that there's a lot more tension in that hammer now. That then slides back in like so. If we're lucky, that pin should slip into position like that. And that pin in down there. So this pin's been out a number of times. Someone's been messing around with it, stripping it down. When I was past this, it didn't have any mainspring in it at all, hammer spring in it at all. So there we go, we've got the mechanism back together. I'll just give that a little tap. Rather than using a hammer, use the plastic end of a screwdriver. And that sounds a bit better. Then the grips go back on. Yeah, helps if you put the right one on the right side. And essentially that's it. Once you put the grips on, that's it. Back together.